Today I am at the La Lucia Sugar Mill Ruins in Puerto Rico. This place is unbelievable. Now today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be taking time-lapse video footage. Normally when I do this, I use the time-lapse function built into a lot of different cameras, but today we're going the full pro route. We're going to be shooting raw images and I'm going to show you how to combine them all in post afterwards and get the absolute highest quality time-lapse video. Today we are continuing our tutorial series where a number of different sponsors are giving us gear to then film these tutorials and bring them to you guys on YouTube 100% for free. As we get to each piece, we'll talk a little bit more about it in detail. But the overarching goal today is to talk about time-lapse video. Now, when we're talking about time-lapses, there's an easy way to do this and there's a very difficult, complex, but professional way to do this. Now, the easy way to do this is just to shoot video and then speed it up in post. But if you want the highest quality possible, you need to shoot raw still images and then combine them together on a computer afterwards. Not only are you going to have the most resolution possible, but you're also going to be able to push and pull those files, retain all the detail in the shadows and the highlights, and get those beautiful colors that you see in all those time-lapse videos when they're showing off the 4K and 8K televisions. This is how you're going to do it. Now, not only are we going to be taking a standard time-lapse, we're going to be taking time-lapses while the camera is moving. And to do that, we're going to be using Syrup's new system. They sent over a bunch of different pieces, and over the course of about an hour, I put everything together and learned how to use it. Now, all of these different components together make up Syrup's Genie 2 3-axis Indy kit. So the basic premise is that although all of these pieces do work together, you don't have to use them together. If you wanted to use a much longer track rather than this magic carpet here, all of these units would fit on it and you could use this rope and stretch it out over a much longer distance. The other thing that's cool is that you don't have to use this linear unit here with these pan and tilt units either. You can use each one of those separately. So if I wanted to remove just this top piece, I could have a standard slider. If I wanted to remove this top piece and put it on a tripod, now I have a 2-axis gimbal. It could pan and tilt. Or I could take all of this apart and just use one of these and I could pan the camera from right to left. So now that you have a basic understanding of what this is and how it works, let's go out into the field and I'm going to show you how I actually set up real time lapses using this system and the Fujifilm X-T30. So I found some amazing ruins here in Puerto Rico. This is called the La Lucia Ruins. This used to be a sugar mill about 140 years ago, and what's left of this looks absolutely amazing. Now my goal for today's shoot is to walk around these ruins and get a number of different time lapses as the sun goes down. I'm hoping to be able to get some stuff with the sun, some interesting cloud movement, and then hopefully if these clouds can dissipate after dark, maybe we can get some stars as well. Now during this shoot, I'm going to be using just one camera and potentially 2 lenses. This is the Fujifilm X-T30. This is the smaller version of the X-T3 that we've been using in some other videos, but this camera, although it's small, still packs an incredible punch. Most of the features that you're gonna find on the X-T3 are still found in this little camera, but this is the ultimate travel camera here. Now during the day, I'm probably going to be shooting exclusively with the 16 to 55 millimeter lens, which is equivalent to about a 24-70 millimeter lens. But once the sun goes down, I'm going to swap over to my 35 millimeter. This gives us the option to get really crystal clear images, even in dark environments. Hopefully we'll be able to see the stars, but as you can see right now, it's really cloudy out here. All right, let's go ahead and set up the X-T30 here and plan out this first shot. Now, one thing that I have noticed about this lens particularly and this Syrup setup here is that once I have everything tightened down, I can't easily move this aperture ring anymore. So you may wanna go ahead and set it to what you think you're going to want. For this shot, I'm going to choose f8. Now remember that most digital cameras and Fujifilm cameras have time-lapse functions built in. We could go into the menu, turn that on, set all of the options, and start the time-lapse, and the camera will take pictures over a set amount of time with a certain amount of duration in between each shot. We could do that. And if I'm shooting a stationary subject like this, it might be the easiest way to go. But the most professional way to do this is to actually let the slider itself control the camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug one of these units directly in to this camera. And by doing it this way, we're allowing the slider to tell the camera when to take pictures. What this means is that the slider will move and then it will take a picture. It will move and then it will take a picture. If you do it the other way, what's going to happen is the camera will take pictures while the slider is moving. Now keep in mind, we're going to be taking pictures at least during the day here with a very fast shutter speed. We're also going to be taking very slow time lapses. So I don't think any of these really slow movements would cause a problem with this particular time lapse. But let's say you were shooting a time lapse at night and you were shooting with a 30-second exposure. And let's say there was something really close to the lens in the foreground. And during that 30-second exposure, the camera moved a millimeter. You would be able to see that in your shot. And so having the slider itself tell the camera when to fire is the safest way to mitigate that. Let's quickly talk about power management. Now, if you're going to have the slider control the camera, you need to go into power management and make sure you turn off the sleep function, because if the camera goes to sleep, the slider will not be able to make it wake up and take a photograph. Now, let's say you were taking time lapses for hours and maybe your interval was going to be 10 or 20 minutes long. It might actually be a better decision to shoot using the intervalometer inside the camera. If you do, the X-T30 will turn itself off in between each shot to save battery life. But if battery life does become a problem, all you have to do is plug a battery into the USB-C port in the side of the camera and you could shoot forever. Okay, so I have the camera mounted, I have it plugged in. Now it's time for me to turn on each one of these different units here. We've got the slider unit itself and then the Genie pan and tilt units as well. And then I need to get my cell phone to control them. All right, so I'm going to open up the Genie 2 app here. And the first thing I'm going to do is click on Connect in the upper right-hand corner. And I'm going to click on Pan, Tilt, and Tracking. As you can see, connects super quick. And then I can go back and create content. I'm going to click on Keyframes here. And in the bottom left, New Setup. So at this point in the bottom, you'll see the start symbol with the circle spinning around. This means we need to set our start point. So I'm going to turn the camera on so that we can see what we're doing. And I will just set a basic exposure here. And I'm going to move all the way to the other side to where I want to start this time lapse. Now let's quickly talk about camera settings here. I have this camera set to shoot in RAW because that's gonna give us the most latitude to push and pull this time lapse when we get back into post. For ISO, I want the lowest ISO possible to get the cleanest looking image, and for this camera, it is 160. I'm going to be shooting at f8 with this particular lens. I believe that's going to give me the sharpest image possible. And then I'm just choosing the correct shutter speed to get me a correct exposure, which in this case is 1/180th of a second. If you're shooting subjects that are moving, you're probably going to want to have a slower shutter speed, maybe slower than 1 or 2 seconds. And if you're shooting outside, that's going to require that you use some serious neutral density filters on the front of your lens to tone everything down to allow you to shoot at those slow shutter speeds. Because I'm not shooting anything that's moving quickly, besides maybe little blades of grass or something, I'm not worried about this at all. Now, obviously things like the clouds are going to be moving, but they're moving so slowly that shooting with a fast or a slow shutter speed really shouldn't make a difference at all. One thing to always remember is that you must be shooting in manual focus. If you allow the camera to autofocus for every single shot, I can guarantee you it's going to misfocus or change focus a little bit as you're shooting. It's going to completely ruin your time lapse and you're not going to be able to fix it in post. If you mess up any of the other settings, the software that we're going to use is getting so good these days that it can fix almost any exposure issue, but they're not going to be able to fix a focus issue. So make sure that your camera is set to manual focus. Now, one cool feature with this camera is that I can leave it in manual focus, but if I tap the screen, it will still autofocus. But then as I take pictures, it's not going to autofocus again unless I tap the screen. That's been really convenient for time-lapse shooting. Okay, so I'm going to tilt the camera up a little bit and I'm going to tilt the camera over here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the end button. And as you can see, now it's spinning around in, and now I have to pick the end point. So I'm going to go all the way to the other end. And let's head back over there and find our finishing position. And remember that it's early enough in the day that I'm not expecting any huge exposure changes, so I'm going to be shooting this in full manual. A little bit later, we're going to be using some semi-automatic modes to help us with some ramping, but right now I think full manual is gonna work. I think this looks great, so I'm going to click end once again, and then in the bottom right it says done. Let's click on that. So as you can see, what it's doing now is it's going to move to the starting position. Now, in the bottom middle of the frame, you'll see there's a little video camera. I'm going to click on that and move it over to time-lapse and click OK. And then up at the top, I'm going to click on record time, and let's set this, I think 10 minutes is good. Now, when it comes to interval, this is something that you don't want to have too long of an interval. If you take too many images, you're going to be fine because you could just speed up the time-lapse in post if it's too slow. But if you don't take enough, you're going to be in trouble. You may not get a long enough time-lapse. So I'm actually going to change this to a 1 second interval. Now remember, if we were shooting with a really long exposure, let's say we were shooting with a 15-second exposure, we couldn't have a 1 second interval here because this unit doesn't know what the camera settings are. So we might have to choose a 20-second interval if we had a 15-second exposure, so that it would give the camera enough time to take the picture and get ready to take the next shot before the carriage moves. Remember, we don't want the carriage moving while the camera's exposing. But we're going to be shooting at 1/180th of a second here, so having a 1 second interval will give us plenty of time to take a picture and move. So I'm going to click OK, and notice that in the upper right it says play time 20 seconds. So that's telling you if you play this back at 24 frames per second, you will have a 20-second clip at the end of this. Now, most people don't want to look at a time-lapse for 20 seconds, but I like shooting time-lapses a little bit longer than I think I should, just in case something goes wrong, or a bird flies through the frame, or somebody bumps the camera, or anything could go wrong. I like to have a little bit of extra time there. Plus, a lot of times I'm recording time-lapses and I get into post and I realize they're too slow. So if I want to create a 5 to 6 second time-lapse, shooting for 20 seconds is actually good because that gives us options when we get back to the computer. So let's go ahead and hit record. Now at this point, you can hear the camera clicking away. It's taking pictures and the carriage is slowly moving here. Now, once this is going, I no longer have to use the phone or the app again. Everything is saved in the unit itself. If I wanted to make changes or reset it, I could reconnect using the app. I've had to do that a couple of times. But you don't need the phone anymore. You can go work on something else. If you have other cameras, you can go set up other time lapses at this time. After 10 minutes, we'll be done here and we can move on to the next shot. Now let's talk about mounting a slider on a tripod. In front of me here, I have the Manfrotto 536 M Pro tripod. This has to be the most robust tripod that's made of carbon fiber I have ever felt in my life. This thing is heavy. It feels like a steel tripod, but that's just how gigantic this thing is. So in terms of a tough, big, heavy tripod, it doesn't get much beefier than this, but the slider that we have is so long that if you try to center mount the slider, even if you remove this head on top, when the camera reaches the end of the slider, it's gonna sag down this way and it's gonna come over here and it's going to sag down this way. So the correct way to mount one of these sliders to a tripod is to actually mount it to 2 tripods. By attaching 2 tripods or light stands to the edges here, you're going to be able to get really nice steady shots without the dipping on either end. But we're not going to be doing that today. Instead, I have removed the pan and tilt Genie 2s that were on top of this slider unit here, and we're going to be mounting that directly to the top of this tripod head. So I'm just going to screw this plate right in here. Keep in mind that we could also remove this entire head if we wanted to and attach it directly to the tripod itself. But this thing is so beefy, we're not gonna have any trouble Now, I've turned off the tracking unit, so when we go into the app and we click on connect, we will only see the pan and tilt unit here. I'm going to connect to both of those. And from this point, everything works the exact same. I can go to create content, keyframe, new setup. And here you can see I just have the ability to move the camera up, down, right, and left. So once again, I can set this as the start point and the end point. We can put it over here. I'm not currently setting up a shot, but this is what I will do in just a little bit. Once again, hit end, and we can do the exact same thing. Now remember, we need to go in and hit time lapse, and then we need to check the record time and the intervals. Once again, I can do 10 minutes with an interval of 1 second for a playback time of 20 seconds, and we can hit record. So as you can see, this is a really modular setup. You don't have to use all 3 units together, but you can, or you could use just one if you wanted to spin right and left or tilt up and down. But I like the ability to choose what you want to use, and then you can leave everything else at home. All right, the sun is going to set in about 15 minutes. I want to quickly talk to you guys about camera settings when it comes to night time lapses. Now, ideally with all time lapses, it would be better if the aperture of your lens never moved. There's always a chance, for instance, if you were stopping down to f8 for each shot and then it's opening up in between each shot, that when it stops down to f8, it may not be the exact same diameter for every single shot. For still photography, this doesn't matter at all. You'd never notice, but for time-lapse photography, you might start to see some flicker. Now, we're going to be using LRTimelapse later to fix all of these exposure issues, but if you're trying to get it as perfect as you can in camera, it would be better if you could somehow lock the aperture. Now, there's a few different ways to do that, and with some cameras, you can actually set the aperture and then take the lens off ever so slightly to lock the aperture, and the camera will still shoot. Honestly, I don't know if Fuji cameras do that or not. But the other thing that you could do is just shoot wide open, because if you're shooting at 2.8 and that's as wide as the aperture goes, it will never move. It's just open to its max all the time. Now, obviously we want our ISO to be as low as possible because we want that clean looking image, but we don't want to go so low that our shutter speed starts to get ridiculous. If you start taking pictures at over 30 seconds per exposure, one, it's going to take forever to get any meaningful time lapse whatsoever, but at the same time, you're going to start introducing star movement as well. So instead of getting really sharp stars, you're going to be able to see them. They're going to start streaking through your time lapse. It's not going to look as good. So to summarize all of this, in terms of aperture, shoot as wide as you can, just open up all the way. In terms of shutter speed, ideally you'd like to be below 15 seconds, 30 seconds maximum. And then for ISO, you want to use the lowest ISO possible without getting some ridiculously long shutter speed. So how did I make those time lapses? Well, it's not particularly difficult, but it is pretty time consuming. Remember, we're working with hundreds or thousands of raw files. I'm going to be using the software today, LRTimelapse. This software costs 99 euros for a private license. It's really amazing software, and I personally don't know if there's any competitors out there. This is what I have used for years when I've needed to make a time lapse like this. And if you find yourself making lots of time lapses, it would probably be worth buying the 250 euro pro license. It does have some benefits that you will probably use, but I don't want to get into all of that. If you want to learn how to use every aspect of the software, go to the tutorials on LRTimelapse's website. They're fantastic, but I'm going to give you a quick run through of how I use this software to make one of these time lapses. So what I did first of all was I got the raw files from just one of the time lapses, the very first one that I shot in this tutorial, and I put them in a folder called time lapse example, and I just have it on my desktop. Now, as you can see, it loads all of the raw files here on the right, And in this window on the left, we can hit play and we can watch it play back. We can also grab this and scrub if we want to. First, I'm going to click on Keyframes Wizard. And this is choosing the amount of keyframes that we want for this shot. And the more complex the shot, or the more time that passes during a time lapse, the more keyframes you're going to want. So the keyframe wizard automatically chose 2 keyframes, one at the beginning and one at the end over here. And honestly, that's all we need. This is only a 10-minute time lapse. This is super simple. Everything was shot in manual, so this is pretty easy to deal with. Now, the Holy Grail wizard is when you're going to be shooting from night to day or day to night. Those can be hours long at times. They have huge differences in exposure. We're not going to be using that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Save. You can see that it's saving the metadata right now, and basically all that it's doing is it's rating the first image and the last image of this time lapse. Now, right here it says drag to Lightroom. So basically I can click on this, drag it down here to Lightroom, and as long as Lightroom is in the library section here, I can just drop this right here. So this is loading all of the raw files and everything's checked. I can just hit import here. So what it's going to do is import each one of these shots, and you will notice that the first and the last shot has a rating of 4 stars. Now down here in the bottom right, I can click on filter and I can go to 1 LRT5 keyframes, and that should show us the first one and the last one only. Keep in mind it's not showing us the last one yet because it's still importing all of these files, and there it goes right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this, go to develop, and this is where we can start recovering some of these dark shadows here. I personally like to boost the exposure and then drop the highlights in the sky. I think that looks a little bit better than trying to lower the exposure and push the shadows up. I'm gonna add a little bit of vibrance to the shot. So now I need to sync the changes from this image to the next one, which is the final shot in this time lapse. So if I hold Shift and click both of these, I can go up to Scripts, LRTimelapse Sync Keyframes. And LRTimelapse says this is better than doing it through Lightroom because there's a chance Lightroom could mess it up. But basically that is all you have to do. And then we can right click on this, metadata, save metadata to file. So basically all we've done now is we've edited 2 shots, the first and the last shot in the time lapse, and we have saved the metadata. Now we're gonna go back to LRTimelapse and we are going to click on reload. So now that we've imported those changes back in by hitting reload, I'm going to click on auto transition. And what this is going to do is it's going to look at the changes that we've made, and it's going to change every single shot in this time lapse. So now I just need to click on visual previews, and what this is going to do is actually render out each individual frame so that we can double check it before the final step, which would be the visual deflicker. So as you can tell, this is going to be pretty slow because we're dealing with 550 raw files. It's only at 5% right now. This is going to take some time, so I'll meet you back here when it's done. Okay, the visual previews are done, and now we can watch it back smoothly. And you can see these exposure levels represented in this pink squiggly line here. If I click on Visual Deflicker, you can see it places this green line behind the pink line, and that's where it's going to try to squash everything down. So if it's a little bright, it's going to darken it. If it's a little dark, it's going to brighten it. And the whole idea here is that after we do this, everything should be a little bit more smooth, and the flickering should be completely gone in theory. It's obviously not perfect all the time, but I'm going to leave it on 10, and we're going to set it to default, and you could do multi-pass deflicker. I don't think this needs it, so I'm just going to hit apply. Now, once again, this is going to take a little bit of time. As I've said, this is not a quick process, so let me let this go and meet you back when it's done. Okay, so now we have to go back into Lightroom. I'm going to hit Control-A to highlight everything, right-click, metadata, read metadata from files. And what this is going to do is it's going to import all of the changes that LRTimelapse just made on their end. This also will take a few minutes. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to export all of these JPEGs one by one. Obviously, we can do this in a batch. Again, everything's highlighted already. I'm going to go to File, Export. And as you can see here, there are LRTimelapse presets here. And what you can do is you can export them with these presets, and then you can go back to LRTimelapse and click on Render Video, and it will basically send everything back over to LRTimelapse, and you could just render it with the next step, and then that would be the final step to actually create the video. But we're gonna make things even more complicated. We're going to do one final step. So instead of using LRTimelapse's preset, I'm just going to choose my own options here. I'm going to create a subfolder. I am going to make quality, around 74. That should be fine. Remember, we don't need these to be super high quality because these are gonna be squashed down so much when they become a video anyway. We'll resize these to the long edge of 7,000 pixels, and that's probably good. And so I can hit export right here. Now this is going to take the longest out of all the other steps because it's having to actually render high quality JPEGs for every single one of these. Once again, I'll see you in a second. Okay, Lightroom is all done making each one of these JPEG files. We could make a video right now. We could either take this folder with all of the JPEGs, put it into LRTimelapse and make a video that way, or we could drop all those files into Adobe Premiere, make each image one frame, and then render it out that way. But I'm going to add one step before we actually make the video, and that is I want to give this time lapse a look. Okay, so I've opened up Exposure X4. I've pointed this software to our folder with all of the JPEGs. Now, if you've recently seen any other tutorials that we've done, you know that I use Exposure X4 almost exclusively as the final step for all of my still photography jobs. If you want to give your images a look, this is the easiest possible way to do it. Now, for the last couple of tutorials, I've gone a little overboard because I've been trying to teach you guys how different parts of this software work, and I have been reamed in the comments like, oh, don't let Lee have those presets, he's ruining his photography. I'm gonna keep it easy today, guys. I'm gonna keep it really easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna go back to the very first image here, and I can just go through and look at all of these different presets that are on the left side over here. If I wanted to make this look, you know, like a vintage film or something, I could do this. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make this look good. So I'm going to choose just standard slide film, and we can go through these one by one and we can just look and choose one that we think makes this time lapse look good. Okay, so I'm a big fan of this Kodak preset down here with the 1970s blues. And if I want to see before and after, I can click up here on before and after, before, after, before, after. So it's kind of crunched down the blacks a little bit. It's turned the sky that has a hint of green in it into a much cleaner blue. I think it looks nice. Now, if I wanted to edit each one of these frames, I could edit one, copy those settings, paste them over, or I could click on one, hold shift, go all the way to the end and click on this last one. And then you'll see here this warning comes up, multiple images are selected, edits will be made to all selected images. So now if I click on this filter on the left, it's going to add it to all of these individual frames here. Now, if you feel like this filter is a little bit too heavy, go up here to opacity and we can lower it down. I think somewhere right in here is pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to keep things super simple. That is all the editing I'm going to do. I'm going to make all you YouTubers happy. I'm not going to destroy the time lapses with my horrible editing skills. But if you'd like to learn more about this software and what it's really capable of doing, check out some of our old tutorials because I go into a lot more depth and detail about every option available. But all we have to do now is export these images one final time. This time we're going to be doing it from this software. So I'm going to click on export. We're going to choose very similar options here, hit export, and once again, we have a lot of waiting to do. I'll meet you back in a second. Okay, so we have the JPEGs that were made in Lightroom. Then we have the edited JPEGs that we just finished in Exposure X4. How do we make this a video? Let's go back into LRTimelapse here, and up top I'm going to click on Render Directly. And what I'm going to do is go to choose here, and I'm going to navigate to the folder of the JPEGs that were just exported by Exposure X4. At this point, you need to decide what type of file you want to output. Now, I have had issues with H.265 files in Adobe Premiere. It really slows things down, but if you've got a powerful computer, you can click on H.265. You can export, if you have the Pro version, in 8K here, which is pretty crazy. And all you have to do is hit render video down here. This is going to take more time. I'll see you in a little bit. Okay guys, I've actually imported an 8K version of that time-lapse in just so you can see what it's like dealing with these files. They are huge and Adobe Premiere hates it. Adobe Premiere uses these files to destroy computers, and you are about to see why. Because if I zoom out here, I'm already at 60%. If I zoom out here, you can see the aspect ratio is taller than our 16:9 workspace that we're working with here. So I need to zoom in a little bit, and that's going to crop the top and the bottom. That's okay. I'd rather do it here than do it earlier. It gives us options. And you can see as I scrub around, it just cannot keep up. And you'll notice that I am walking in the frame on the left side. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna zoom in a little bit more just to crop past that so you don't even see that anymore. And then the other thing that you'll notice, it's so slow, is that the rotation is off. It wasn't perfectly flat ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rotation, if Premiere will allow me, of 5 degrees. So one other thing that you'll notice is that I have already sped up this time lapse to 300%. Now to do that, all you have to do is right click on it, speed duration, and I have typed in 300%. Now I wanted to show you guys what it looked like before and then after and everything, but it's so slow rendering this footage. I would be here for another 2 hours just trying to show you this one thing. So just take my word for it. If your time lapses are a little slow, just go to speed and duration, turn up the speed a few 200%, 300%, 1000%, whatever you want. And then if you want to render it out so that you can actually play it back smoothly, because if I hit play, you can see it's not going to play smoothly at all. It's going to go crazy and then freeze. Click on sequence and then render in to out. And what this is going to do is it is going to bring up this rendering thing. It's going to make whatever is on this timeline or within the in and out points, if you set those, green, and then you'll be able to play them back smoothly, and then you can edit with that. Now this is the actual timeline of the very tutorial that you are currently watching. And I have been editing this for so long. I am ashamed of how long it's been taking to edit this. But I did want to mention one final sponsor, and that is MusicBed. All of the music from this tutorial, and I think I found some pretty cool stuff, is from musicbed.com. You can sort through all this music by genre or mood. I personally did it through mood for this particular video, and I clicked on things like happy, peaceful, serious, somber, uplifting, and then what I would do was sort by most popular tracks. Once you click on uplifting, let's say, you'll see all of these tracks start to come up. You can click the play button here. It will start playing down below. You can actually see the waveform, so if you want to click over here so that it's actually the crescendo of the song, that's really all I care about. I'm clicking to the loud parts of every song, and then I'm moving on to the next song super quickly. There's no loading, it's instantaneous, and you can hear the most important parts of the song without spending tons of time on each song. When you find a song that you like, you can hit the little heart button over here, download it directly from this page, or you can put it in a cart and you can download multiple tracks at once. MusicBed is a subscription service for businesses like us. It's 89 bucks a month. For weddings, it's just 59. And if you are a personal YouTuber or social media person, it's just 9 bucks a month. You definitely can't beat that, so check it out. Big thanks to all of the sponsors for making this video possible, and also big thanks to my wife. She actually helped film a lot of this. We had to go out 2 nights to get this thing done. She did a ton of work to help me out because Patrick has been sick for so long. So big thanks to her. If you'd like to check out more photo and video tutorials just like this, but much longer, head over to fstoppers.com/store to see all of the tutorials that we've made over the years. But if you'd like more free content just like this, make sure you head over to fstoppers.com.